Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Unplugged Woodworking's podcast. Okay, so I'll get this out of the way straight away. Yes, there's going to be ads from now on. I do actually pay for this subscription for the podcast itself, so it helps us out to pay it at like the monthly cost. There'll be one at the beginning and one at the end. There's going to be no in betweenies. I don't like it myself, so I'm not going to put anyone else through it. So there won't be any adverts in between. However, if you'd like to support the show, you can do so. There's going to be a link for t-shirts if you want one, and there's going to be a link to my PayPal. All donations are welcome. So, what have I been up to? Not really a great deal, to be honest. I've been messing around with my van. I was doing some carpeting and stuff, which is a right nightmare. I did, however, start to make a chair. Everyone seems to be making chairs these days, and I was getting a bit jealous. I felt a little bit left out, shall we say. So I've kind of started making it. It is going to be a Welsh stick chair technically, but I am changing a few little things. I mean, the front of the chair seat is going to be round instead of straight. The two sides of the chair are going to taper in towards the back of the chair, and obviously it's going to be rounded. I'm thinking about maybe splaying out the top portion of the backrest. I'm kind of just making things up as I go along, which is what I normally do. So yeah, that's by the time this is published, I should be a bit further than what I am, because at the moment I've just kind of roughly got the seat cut, like a rough cut if you like. Today, I'll obviously, after I've recorded this, I'm going to go straight out and start marking out some of my sight lines and stuff. So maybe I might get some of the sight lines done, and so on and so forth. I did actually have to do a lot of work with this to get it flat. I did have some of the slab left over, and it was badly cupped, so it took quite a lot of work to get it to where you'll see if you want to check us out on Instagram. And if you want to do so, there'll be links in the description. If they work, for some reason they're not working on Spotify, they're all clumped together. I don't know what this is. If anyone could let us know, I would appreciate it. However, it is working on other platforms. I think I'm just going to, when I post this, I'm just going to leave links to the Google podcast platform. I haven't had an issue with that. It goes straight to it. I haven't had any complaints. So I think I'm going to stick to that. Also, I had an idea. I don't know how many people would like to hear it. They may or they may not. But I was going to start going through a few joints, as in a detailed talk through how I would personally mark out a joint and cut a joint, whether this be dovetails, mortise and tenon joints, housing joints, bridle joints, so on and so forth. I don't know if anyone would kind of be interested in that. If anyone's got a strong kind of, they don't want to hear it, if you want to leave us a comment and give us some suggestions of what you do want to hear, that would be awesome. But I think I might go that way. If anyone would like to hear it, obviously leave us a comment on my social media, or send us an email, whatever. But I think it might be quite a good talk through, especially for all my joints, because I do them a little bit differently, because I am using a lot of I do use a lot of lower benches. I think I've got 5 lower benches here or something. There was a 4 or 5, plus I've got the medium sized bench. I am actually using the lower bench at the moment, my solid oak Roman workbench with the shave horse attachment, and I'm actually going to record the build of the Welsh stick chair, so hopefully that should be up soonish. I was supposed to be doing a video of just me basically using the poor man's workbench, but I lost some of the footage. I didn't record some of the footage when I was making a coffee table, so I had to leave it, unfortunately. But I can say that the poor man's workbench, it does actually work quite well for what it is. I skimmed on thickness on the legs and on the bench top, obviously, and it's worked out pretty well. So that's definitely going into the book. I'm still busy with the book. Obviously, I've got a lot of photos to add. I keep on changing stuff around. I keep on rewriting chapters. So hopefully it shouldn't be too much longer before I get it to the editors. Hopefully. Okay, so today I wanted to talk about Viseless work holding. I've kind of covered this a little bit-ish. There is a bit of a YouTube video, although the audio is not very good. I'll leave a link to that, so you can check that out if you want to check it out. But be aware the audio isn't great. But I do demonstrate a few things on the Roman workbench. If you do Viseless work holding, you'll probably know these anyway. But for those of you that don't, if you want to check it out, I'll leave a link in the description. Okay, so I'm just gonna run through a few things, just a few like processes of what's, like every day-to-day things that I do, and I'm kind of gonna try to explain how I do them and how I use the pegs and the wedges, the notch, my hold fasts, even clamps, and just try to kind of explain what I'm doing. Some of the pros and cons, maybe, if I'm doing something, you may have to tweak something what you're doing for it to work more efficiently, so on and so forth. So these are in no specific order. They're kind of a bit jumbled up. Just as I was writing the notes, just think whatever was coming to my head, I just wrote it down. So I'm going to start with planing, and I'm going to start with planing wide boards. Specifically glued up boards. If I've got any edge jointing to do, you may be talking about 3 boards glued together. These boards for myself are typically 170 millimeters wide, so it's pretty wide. So is what I'll do with these. Obviously, I just create the triangle. So you basically got your 2 pegs. You put the piece of timber against these 2 pegs, and then on the other side of the wood you would have another peg approximately in the middle. It doesn't have to be dead on in the middle, but approximately in the middle, and I personally just use a wedge it into place, and it actually holds it really, really well, and I can edge plane on that. So, there is a little bit of movement, but for what it is, it actually, the pegs and the wedges hold really, really well. Especially considering you've got multiple boards glued together. So a thing with this is that if you're doing this and you're planing, and I don't know, for whatever reason, you might get a little bit of tear out. The grain might be going, lifting in both directions. So you might want to choose the lesser of the 2 evils. And sometimes you will get a little bit of resistance. You can obviously pull your plane iron back and stuff, and that does help. But what I personally tend to find that happens is when I'm doing that, it tends to lift the board up, the back end of the board, with it being so high. So is what you would do with this, you would actually put the back end of the board as close to the wedge as you possibly can. So when you're planing, it wants to tip forward. So now that you've got more of the back end anchored, if you like, or clamped in place, it's less likely to kick up. But what I find, it does that all the time. So another thing, it might be common sense to a lot of people, but to some it might not be. Whatever way you're planing, or if you're chiseling, whatever, have the point of your wedge basically pointing that way. Because if you wedge it in the opposite direction of the way you're planing, you'll just end up pulling it out. But as you're planing, technically it does pull it forward. It does tighten on itself if you've got it pointing in the right direction. Although the wedge can and does slacken, obviously, with a movement, like your left and right movements. But if it's not too wide of a board, that can, it'll basically not go anywhere. It'll just tighten on itself. So yeah, I'm just looking at me notes here. I've basically covered regular boards. I say a regular board, I mean like one board, roughly at 170 millimeters. It's the same again. When you're doing this, if it's slightly less than 170 millimeters, I think a good thing with the pegs, well, I don't know if a lot of people are aware of this, when I make pegs to go into the benches, I'll put a slight taper on them. Typically I use oak because I tend to have a lot of oak, offcuts and whatever else, because a lot of the finish I do tends to be oak. I like to work oak, so they do tend to be oak. So the good thing about this is that it'll compress really well. So if your board is a little bit less than 170 millimeters and the pegs might be a little bit proud, just get your mallet and tap them in, and they will compress. They actually compress quite a lot. In the past, is what I've done, if they've become too compressed, or even just with the humidity in the air or whatever, it's too tight, too loose, whatever. More so if it's too loose, you can stick it in water and it'll swell it back up again. So I've done that a couple of times. I don't know how many times I'll get away with that. But I've actually still got the very first pegs I made, and I think that's like 3 or 4 years ago when I very first started messing around with a Roman workbench, I think, anyway. And they're a bit kicked about, but they're actually still usable, the pegs. So what about if you're playing in like shorter boards? So I mean, shorter boards, these would be like class more like rails, what I'm talking about. So if you're going to go for like something in the region of, just say 2 inches, for instance, 2 inches in width, and whatever, 20 millimeters in thickness. So personally, I don't usually wedge these into places. What I'll do, providing both ends are reasonably square, I'll use the dogs. So I'll have a dog at the front of the setup. So this basically stops it from obviously moving forward, and then I'll have 2 dogs at either side. Sorry, not at either side, on the same side, but like supporting the length of the piece I'm planing. But the way I have it done is I have it set up on a diagonal, so it tends to go from the outside of the bench to the centre of the bench. And as what happens is when you start planing, you're actually planing into towards the centre of the bench. So you're pushing against these 2 side supports, and then obviously you're pushing against your very first dog, and it can't go anywhere. And it's actually really quick. So if this needs to be square for whatever reason, if you're gluing it or whatever the circumstances, there's no wedge or anything, so you can literally just pick it up, run your eye down it, run your square down it, and then put it back. It's like seconds to do that. I mean, to be honest, you could actually do something like this with the wedge, or even if it's a bit thicker. It doesn't take a lot. I mean, if you are using the wedge, you've only got to pull the back of the workpiece up, and the wedge just comes out really easy. That's providing if it's a bit of a longer piece. The shorter the piece is, you'll find that you cannot actually pull it out. You have actually got to tap it out with a hammer. But that's pretty possible to do. So another thing when you're using the pegs, I just thought I'd mention this, is that depending on what wood you're using, it's going to be so easy to damage the face or the edge of the board. So a good example of this would be if you're just say we've got a 9-inch board. We're going to do some edge planing. The board is pine or it's spruce or somewhere, it's a softwood basically. So if we're putting that towards against oak pegs, and then we're whacking a wedge in it, what do you think's going to happen? It's going to indent the the pine, the softwood basically. So if I'm doing anything like that, and sometimes I do it with oak as well, depending on what I'm doing, but you just put a sacrificial piece at the back of it. It's a bit scrap. I mean, me personally, I've always got a bit scrap, so I will just put a bit scrap, and then just wedge it. And it's sometimes to look at it, because you've got the sacrificial piece, and then you've got a gap in between the pegs, and when you first start doing things like this, or even if you look at it, you think that's not going to support it, because the pegs, there's only like an inch or so, or 2 inches supporting, the bottom of the workpiece. It's going to come loose, and you'll be really surprised it actually doesn't. Like I've said numerous times on different podcasts and in my social media, if you give that wedge a good tighten, it ain't going anywhere. With the exception of if you're using really wide pieces and you're moving them backwards and forwards, it will wriggle out. But I mean, 9 out of 10, it stays where it is. It's not an issue type of thing. Okay, so where am I here? I'm just checking my notes. So another good thing that maybe a lot of people would consider, that the pegs and the wedge wouldn't kind of hold, would be like chisel work. Now, I think there's a few examples of this on my social media if you want to have a look. But basically, is what I'll do if I'm sitting on the Roman workbench, or even standing at the poor man's bench. I'll put the pegs in, but I'll put 2 pegs in at the very front end. And then I'll put obviously the middle one in. So basically the piece what I'm working on is going to be running 90 degrees to the length of the bench, if that makes sense. And basically, just say we're rounding over a corner, a face corner of whatever it might be, I don't know. Take for instance when I've done the sawhorse attachments for the Roman workbench. I think that was about 2 inches thick. So obviously at either end I rounded them over just so they were round over and they didn't catch on myself or anything else. It's just nice and round over, and plus it looks good on the eye as well. So is what I've done, basically wedged them into place, and just started using this chisel, rough chiseled it out, got pretty close with the chisel. This is how I do them anyway. Use a Shinto rasp, a normal file, and then sandpaper. And I think a lot of people when they kind of look at it or think of it and think, as soon as you start hitting that piece of wood with a chisel, when you start removing material with a chisel, it's just going to move, and it doesn't. It really, really doesn't. It's so surprising at how well them pegs and wedges will hold it. But you can actually do this if you wanted to go lengthwise, if you wanted to keep in length with the bench, so meaning that the piece of timber that you're going to round off, it's running the same direction as the bench. It wouldn't be 90 degrees, but I think 9 out of 10 I prefer to just go 90 degrees to the bench, so it would be going from width edge to width edge rather than long ways, if you like. Okay, where am I? So I think we'll talk a little bit about soaring now on the basically holding work pieces. So cross cutting, it kind of depends what I'm cutting. If it's a long piece, is what I'll tend to do. Just say I've got a board. Say I'm cutting a board up. It might be an 8-foot board, and I might want however many cuts out of it. There might be a 2-foot board. There might be a 3-foot board. Whatever. So I'm cutting it up I'm cutting an 8-foot board up into sections basically. So what I tend to do with things like that, same again. I'll have the board lying on the bench, and I'll have it wedged in the same way that I would have it wedged if I was going to be planing. So along the length of the bench, I would have 2 pegs in, and then obviously roughly in the middle. Doesn't have to be in the middle, but roughly in the middle. and then I would just wedge it. So I'd have pegs at one edge of the bench and pegs at the other edge of the bench, and basically this just clamps it. You know what I mean? It keeps it in place. So a trick to make this work is that you keep your saw cut as close to the edge of the bench as you can. So basically, you get into position, you give it a couple of taps with a hammer, you know, and it ain't going anywhere. So that's pretty cool because it takes you seconds to wedge this. You're not using clamps, and you're not using holdfasts. I find for me this is the quickest method, especially if you've got a lot of this to do. You know, like a lot of like length cutting. It's pretty cool, especially if you're using you know, like longer boards to do it. So it's like a couple of taps of the hammer, it's ready, you cut it, and it is what it does as well. It leaves your other hand to support the edge of the workpiece. You know, the piece that's going to, like, the piece that would fall on the ground if you weren't supporting it. So that's really handy, and obviously it helps to position yourself that way. Whether you be a left-hander or a right-hander, the way this is set up, you know, you've just basically got to position yourself on either edge of the bench. There's kind of no restrictions. This is if you're using it in the garden, which I tend to do, or you've got the room to walk around the bench. But I think that's pretty cool. I do actually do this the same way, and I do it, as I said before, like 90 degrees. When you do it 90 degrees to the bench, I do find it is a bit more stable, a bit more steady, if you like, because you're going against the whole length of the bench. You're going against the force of the whole length of the bench. So if you try to rock, if you can imagine a Roman workbench or even a tall workbench, if you try to rock it, the length of itself, it won't really rock. But if you push it the width of itself, there's probably a good chance that you can actually lift one or two of the legs up when you're kind of rocking it, if that makes sense. So sometimes, depending on what you're doing, it might be better for you to cut, like your saws lengthways. So the workpiece you're working on is actually 90 degrees going across the bench rather than with the length of the bench. Obviously, you can't do this all the time, but you know, if you can, it's probably better, you know, for movement. Having said that, though, what I described before with you know, cutting like an 8 foot board into like different lengths, that's not too much of an issue. I mean, to be honest, the solid oak Roman workbench I've got, that's like, you know, that's pretty stout, and there's a bit of weight, and that, although I can still pick it up and move it to where I want to move it, there's actually a bit of weight, and that doesn't tend to go anywhere. The poor man's workbench, that's pretty decent actually, considering the weight of it. I'm not sure what's the heaviest out of the two of them. I think the oak one might be the heavier out of the two. But I think it's more to do with the splay and the fact that I'm using it on grass, that there's not a lot of movement when I do the cutting, when I've got the board like positioned lengthways and I'm cutting it, because if you can imagine, if you're cutting something, it will have a tendency to rock backwards and forwards, you know. And that's why I'm saying, if you do it lengthways, lengthways on the bench, it can't really rock backwards and forwards, because you'd have to lift the whole length of the bench up for you to do that, which, you know, 9 out of 10 or quite nearly 10 out of 10, it's not going to happen. So yeah, that's that. So rip cutting. Now with rip cutting, you'll never ever rip, well, for me, I don't do this, you'll never ever rip cut a piece of timber on the width of the bench, any bench that I've ever used, well, either it be a tall bench or a low bench, because as what I've just been talking about, the rocking motion, when you're ripping, you obviously, if you're using a Western saw, you can get a lot of force behind it, so you will actually rock the bench. And even if you're using a Japanese saw, same again, when you're using it, you're just going to pull the bench and you're going to rock the bench. So this always tends to be on the length of, well, it is, it doesn't tend to be, it is always on the length of the bench when I'm cutting. So if you're cutting long lengths, it's a bit of the same scenario. If you're using an 8-foot board and say you might need to cut, say, down the middle of this 8-foot long board, it's actually pretty good just to put the piece how I described it was clamped before. Where you have pegs at either edge of the bench, and basically you just get it wedged in. You cut a little bit, tap the wedge out, and you just shove the board forward like off the bench. And you can actually do that for maybe it's like 3/4 of the cut. Obviously, when I'm doing this, I'm still kneeling on the bench, and a lot of people might argue and say, well, what's the point in doing it? If you're kneeling on the bench. But in my experience, even if you're kneeling on a piece of wood, it will still move around. So if you've got it wedged in this fashion, it really doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't move left to right, and it doesn't move backwards or forwards unless you move it yourself. So I would really recommend that. If you've got a Roman workbench and you haven't tried it, it's actually quite good. Obviously you have got to take a little bit of time to tap the wedge out and then shove it forward and then tap the wedge back in. But I think it's worth it, because it really does hold it in place. So another way I will use the bench is with the hold fasts. When I'm ripping. So obviously you just put it over the edge of the bench. Make sure you're not going to cut into your bench, which I have done a few times. And you'll just put the hold fasts in. Now, I tend to do this for littler things and shorter, typically, or I might, or if something's away on the edge, because obviously sometimes you can't use the pegs if it's away on the edge. So that's when I'll use the hold fasts. The hold fasts are pretty good. So is what I would advise you to do if you haven't used hold fasts before and you get them. Get some leather, get some cork, some rubber, whatever, and just basically glue it to the under end, because when you're hitting these hold fasts down, they will leave indentations in your workpiece. So that's something to consider. And sometimes, well, me personally, sometimes I don't notice them because I don't know why. I've got one that's got is it called crubber, where it's a mix of cork and rubber. So I've got one that's done and I've got one that's not done, and I've got no idea why there's only one done and not the other one done. I've no idea. Anyway, that's something to be aware of, because sometimes I'll use them and I'll think, where's that come from? And it clicks and I say, I must do that, and I never do it. I really need to do it though. But yeah, the hold fast as well. I mean, they are pretty good. Once they get a hold of something, they've really got a hold of something. If something's moving around, which it really does, you can hire a mat under there, just like a rubber mat sort of thing, and it doesn't go anywhere. So that's pretty cool for that. One of the things I don't like about the hold fast is that they can get pretty close to or how should I put it? When I'm sawing, my blade can get pretty close to it, to the hold fast, and I have actually caught like a couple of the teeth, and I do actually do it occasionally, and I don't think it's more carelessness because I'm very aware that I'm very close to it, but it can happen, and obviously if it happens, it's going to blunt your saw. So that's kind of one of the things I don't like about that. But yeah, I would still use one, or use a set. I was actually thinking about trying out some wooden ones. Maybe if I could find a good selection of branches. Anyone that hasn't seen that, you can check that out. It is readily available over the there's articles on the internet. Where you just basically use a branch that's basically shaped like that. So I was going to think about just making some as well, but I don't know how well these would hold up. Maybe well, maybe not. Okay, where am I? I'm just checking my notes. Okay, so cutting shoulders, for the likes of like dovetails and such. If I was using like a board, maybe even like a 9-inch wide board. So if I was going to cut the shoulders, I would just stick them back into the peg setup, the same that I would use for planing, for edge planing. So I actually do that quite often. If I'm using wider boards, and I want to cut them, I'll tend to use the notch, which I'm going to cover in a minute. So face planing, because I haven't really covered this. I mean, this is how could you describe it? It's kind of straightforward. Basically, when I'm doing anything like this, I tend to use it. It can be anywhere from one peg, 2 peg, 3 peg, or even 4 pegs. Not pegs, sorry, dogs. For anyone that would like to make some dogs as well, just out of wood, there's no metalwork involved. I'll leave a link in the description because I did actually make some, and it's basically just making some round dowel. I've done this all by hand. I didn't use any dowel cutters. I didn't even use a shave horse attachment, just to show how it can be done without a shave horse attachment. So I'll leave a link in the description if you just want to check that out. Where was I? I've lost my place now. The dogs. So sometimes I might use a mat when I'm planing, face planing. This just stops it going from left to right. I mean, if it's something in the region of 2 inches wide, I'll just use one peg, and basically just use a mat, obviously, and just playing against that. That works pretty well. When you start getting a bit wider, when you get up to maybe 9 inches, I'll probably use maybe one. I'll use one that I push the workpiece up to, and then I might use 2 for to stop the board from moving away from us. It's to support the board on the length. I do use 4 sometimes. I might use like two at the top end of the bench to stop it from moving forward, and then I'm use 2 down the length. I don't tend to do this too often. For really, really wide boards, if I've got boards that I've glued up, and maybe like 3 or 4 boards glued up, I just tend to use 2 of the dogs, and I will always normally use a mat. The thing about the mat is, though, the mat works really well, but once you start getting some dust, off shaving or whatever, that goes onto the mat, or if you start getting some like shavings onto the mat, things tend to slide around. So you've got to kind of keep the mats get the excess dust off it and get the excess shavings off it. That can be a little bit annoying for me sometimes. I think that might just be me being a little bit impatient, but yeah. So the notch, I don't really use the notch a lot in the way that it kind of could be used, or it probably was used in the past, to cut maybe to cut, I don't know, tenons, to cut maybe dovetails on not too wide boards, like maybe 4-inch wide boards, things like that. It can work really well. I think it's more because I tend to use a Japanese saw when I'm cutting. I think if I was using a tenon saw, I think I'd probably use a notch a little bit more to do things like that. But when I'm using a Japanese saw, obviously, me personally, the way I use it, I think the way it's intended to be used, because I've never been trained to use a Japanese saw, but you tend to pull it more towards the ground, or at least I do. So you cut more of an angle diagonally towards yourself and towards the ground. So you can actually hit the bench, with the edge of the saw handle. So I don't tend to use it too much like that. Typically for me is what I do is I'll clamp a piece of timber in there. Not clamp it, I'll wedge a piece of timber in there, and then I'll actually clamp my workpiece to that piece of wood that I've just wedged in, if that makes sense. I do this actually pretty often, and there's a bit of an accessory. I haven't seen anyone else do anything like this, and I am still messing around with the accessory. I quickly knocked one up. It was very rough, but it seemed the principle what I had in my head seemed to work really well. I don't really want to say too much about it because obviously I've still got a lot of testing to do, so I don't want anybody wasting the time. But basically, in short, it's just an L shape, and there's a bit of a length of it. And with this, the things I'm testing out, you possibly might be able to cut like dovetails going width ways. This might also be good for cutting, tenons and stuff. If you're even if you're using a Japanese saw, it might be really, really well suited for that. So, like I said, I've still got a lot more testing to do, but I think it's going to utilize the bench a little bit better, and it's going to give you kind of like a bit of a makeshift vise. But if you kind of want to try this out, basically just get a piece of timber, maybe about 4 inches in width, and maybe like 2 inches in 2 foot in length. Wedge this into your notch. This is if you've got a notch in your workbench, and basically just start clamping things to it. I mean, I've been messing around with this for quite a while now, and one of the good things I like to do about it, just say you've got some glued up boards, and you might just say it's for the top of a blanket chest. So you might want to end plane the end grain plane these boards. So you might have the 3 boards together, 170 millimeters each boards. So you've got 3 of these glued together. So basically, when you've got this wedge, this piece of wood wedged in, you can basically get something what I've just described with the 3 boards glued together, put it against the piece that's already in the bench, and basically just plane against it. There's no need to wedge it or anything, and it's quite sturdy. It doesn't go anywhere, and it supports it, and you can actually do that. Again, I am actually messing around with different things, and I have actually included a wedge, but I'm still, as I said, I'm still messing around with different methods and stuff, so I cannot really divulge fully until everything's, until I'm experimented fully and I'm happy with it. Plus these will be going in the book as well, because there's like a few things, different techniques, and a few other things I've been messing around with. Where am I here? Oh, while I remember as well, another good thing what I like about the notch, what I haven't mentioned, is that what I've just been talking about when you wedge the 2 foot long piece in. Obviously it doesn't have to be 2 foot long, it can be anything. You can just use scraps what you've got lying around. But when I wedge these in, sometimes is what I'll do, especially if I'm doing I'm sure everyone that follows us on social media has seen us make a cassette tape coffee table. So when I've got these together, sometimes most of the time I've got to plane like the bottom edges to make them all flush and square. So as what I'll do, I'll put the edge or the face edge against this piece of wood I've got in, and I'll basically just clamp it in place. and I can plane against that, and that works really well. That, you know, if you want to plane a really wide board, if you've got too much movement, obviously I've discussed boards if you want to play like playing boards, you know, edge playing boards that are like, you know, you've got 3 boards glued together sort of thing. They will move and it will work itself loose, but it is kind of pretty sturdy. But what I'm talking about there is 20mm in thickness, where if I'm doing something like a tape cassette, you know, by the time I'm finished, I think like that ends up about, is it about like 70mm in thickness. So doing this what I've just described with a piece of wood in the notch, this works really, really well. So I think the last one I'm going to cover would be the tool chest. Again, if you follow us on Instagram, whatever, you've probably seen us do this a couple of times, although I don't do it a great deal now, because obviously I tend to prefer to cut me tape, at least me tails on in the horizontal position rather than having them in the vertical position. But this is good for other things, and you would have to have a mess around with it. So basically, I've got a Japanese toolbox chest, which is obviously square. It's got a nice flat edge, which, you know, you can clamp things to basically. And also I've got a smaller kind of toolbox. That was just a dovetail box, and again, you could, that's got a nice smooth edge, what you like, a nice square flat edge that you can clamp to as well. So basically, is what I'll do is, depending on what sort of toolbox I'm using and what's in the toolbox, because obviously sometimes it might have things in it, quite a lot of tools in it. It depends what I'm using and such. So if I'm using the big Japanese one, that's pretty good. There's a bit of weight in that, and there's usually tools in it. So is what I'll tend to do with that is I'll put a mat down and I'll put the box on top of it, and the sheer weight of it tends to keep it in place, combined with the fact that you've got it on the mat, because it kind of like move around on the mat. And basically it's good for dovetails, you know, wide board dovetails. That's probably the only reason I would use it, I think. But you can just basically put your boards against it, or your board, glued up board, and basically use 2 clamps, you know, 2 quick release clamps, clamp it into place, and you're good to start dovetailing. Like I say, if you've never seen this, don't have a look through me Instagram photos. There's definitely 2 or 3 what I can think of examples of this. There might even be videos of it as well, but that's pretty handy. If you have got a little bit of movement, same again, just use another mat, drape the mat over the edge where the board's being clamped out, and you won't get any movement at all. I mean, these mats here in England, you can go to like a pound shop. There's numerous pound shops with different names, but if you go to one of these pound shops, you pick up a mat for £1. So they don't last too long if you're going to start chiseling and using a knife over them, which I do tend to do, you know. But I think they're worth it, and for the price of £1, they do save you a lot of aggravation for keeping a workpiece in place. I have actually also cut tenons in a similar manner, and that worked out really, really well. So if anyone's transitioning from maybe like a high bench to a low bench, you know, maybe they just want to get outside, maybe they have to work inside the apartment, because I believe that's getting quite popular now, working inside of like apartments, balconies, just wherever you can woodwork, you know. So check my Instagram out. So that's pretty cool, and I actually do demonstrate this on a video when I'm using a Roman workbench to build a blanket chest. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check it out. You can check it out. So I think that's just about me nearly up with my time now. So again, thanks everyone for all the new followers I've had on Instagram, Facebook. Check us out if you haven't already. thank you very, very much for listening. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much for all the kind comments what I get on a regular basis now and support about this. So until the next time, I'll see you later, guys. Don't forget to leave us a message if you want to leave us a message.